The first thing I noticed when we stepped into the theater was the smell. Polished oak floors and the faint trace of champagne that seemed to follow the servers as they glided between clusters of guests. The building was one of those century-old landmarks in Austin, the kind that feels like it's seen more important things than whatever's happening tonight. Gilded crown moldings, painted ceilings with mythic scenes, and chandeliers that hummed faintly from the strain of holding decades of dust and crystal. Lauren looked like she belonged there. Black silk dress that caught the light at every turn. Her hair swept into a loose chignon that made her neck look impossibly long. She had that way of moving that made people turn their heads without realizing why. I'd seen it happen countless times before. The gala was for some arts foundation she'd been volunteering with lately. Something about restoring historical architecture. It was the kind of event where people laughed with their mouths more than their eyes, where champagne flutes were more for decoration than drinking, and where men like me ended up in conversations about stock portfolios and emerging markets with people who used those terms the way others might talk about the weather. For the first hour, we mingled together. I trailed her as she made her way through a series of warm handshakes and air kisses, smiling for photos, laughing lightly at things that didn't seem all that funny. Eventually, we split. She drifted toward the board members, and I found myself in a conversation with an older gentleman about the merits of automatic versus quartz movements in vintage watches. It wasn't until my glass was nearly empty that I realized she wasn't anywhere in sight. I scanned the main hall first. She wasn't at the silent auction tables, not by the bar, not with the string quartet playing in the corner. That's when I caught a flash of her dress through the archway leading into the foyer. I stepped toward it, meaning to just tap her on the shoulder and walk her back in, but I stopped at the threshold. She wasn't alone. The man standing with her was about my age, maybe a little older. Tall, well-groomed, with a streak of silver through otherwise dark hair that made him look like he'd been plucked from an expensive cologne ad. They were close, too close. His hand rested lightly at the small of her back, and her fingers were on the lapel of his suit jacket. Not resting there idly, not brushing past in a polite gesture, lingering. Pressed into the fabric in a way that spoke of familiarity. I told myself to move, to interrupt, to make my presence known. But I didn't. I stood there, watching. That's when I saw it. Pinned to his jacket was a small raven, silver or maybe pewter, its wings slightly outstretched. A strange, elegant piece of jewelry. My stomach tightened, because I'd seen that exact emblem before. 3 weeks ago, tucked in the bottom of Lauren's handbag. It wasn't a pin but a coin-like token, embossed with the same raven in miniature. I'd picked it up, turned it over in my hand, and asked her about it. "Oh," she'd said casually, slipping it from my fingers. A little trinket from a fundraiser I attended. Meant to be good luck. She hadn't looked me in the eye when she said it. Now here it was again, on the lapel of a man I'd never met. Lauren's hand fell away from his jacket as he said something I couldn't hear. She laughed, soft, almost an asterisk mate, and then stepped back. He glanced toward the entrance of the foyer as if checking for someone, then gave a polite nod and walked away, disappearing into the throng of tuxedos and gowns. A second later, she spotted me. Her face changed in that small but unmistakable way people's do when they realize they're being observed. A flicker. Surprise? Guilt? And then it was gone, replaced by the practiced warmth she wore so easily. "There you are," she said, walking toward me with a champagne flute in hand. "You have to try the smoked salmon canapés. They're incredible." I looked at her fingers as she spoke, half expecting to see them still curved in the shape of that man's lapel. "Who was that?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She followed my gaze toward the foyer arch but didn't miss a beat. "Oh, just someone from the Foundation's donor circle. We were talking about some of the theater's restoration work." I nodded slowly. "Didn't recognize him." She shrugged. "You wouldn't. He's new." And then she smiled. A smile so effortless it could have been real, except I knew Lauren's real smiles. This one didn't reach her eyes. The rest of the night passed in a blur of small talk and clinking glasses. Lauren was attentive enough, looping her arm through mine when we moved between groups, laughing at the right moments, leaning in close when someone made a joke. But every now and then, I caught her scanning the room, her gaze flicking toward the entrance to the foyer. Always for just a second, then back to whoever she was speaking with. I told myself I was imagining it, that the embrace I'd seen was nothing more than a friendly greeting, that the pin was a coincidence. But that small, cold knot in my chest wouldn't loosen. Even as we posed for a photo together near the end of the evening, her head resting lightly against mine, I couldn't stop seeing the way her hand had rested on that man's chest, or the raven glinting in the foyer's light like it knew a secret I didn't. That night, I ended up by the tall window in our bedroom, the one that looks past the live oaks toward the quiet street lamp on the corner. Austin hummed in the distance, but our block was a postcard. Still, polite, pretending not to watch us. Lauren set her clutch on the dresser and hummed something under her breath as she unpinned her earrings. I kept replaying the gala in my head like I could edit out a single frame and make everything normal again. The embrace, the careful space between them after, the raven that glinted like a wink meant for someone else. I told myself to let it pass. You can choose that for a while. You can decide that what you saw was ordinary, that your eyes were tired, that your mind exaggerates when your heart is afraid. I brushed my teeth. I folded my jacket. I climbed into bed and pretended to scroll sports scores I didn't care about. When she slid beside me, she kissed my shoulder and said goodnight like a line delivered perfectly on cue. I stared at the ceiling and tried to let the blankness wash me clean. But once you tug a thread, everything loosens. The evening briefings had started months before, small enough at first that I almost admired the hustle. She'd call from the car on her way back from work. "Hey, quick pop-up with the leadership team. I'll be late." Her voice had that chipper edge people add when they know they're asking for patience. She'd be back by 9, then by 10, then by 11. A couple of times, she came home after midnight with the bright, practiced look of someone who has been important for hours and isn't ready to stop. She'd pour a splash of wine, say something about a breakthrough, and then go quiet in the middle of a sentence like the thought had been rented and the lease was up. Her phone shifted from household object to carry-on luggage. It used to live on the kitchen counter while we cooked or on the arm of the couch during movies. Then it migrated to the bathroom, to the backyard, to the bedside table with do not disturb glowing purple like a private signal. One afternoon, I lifted it off the cutting board so I could chop cilantro, and the lock screen flashed a code pattern I didn't recognize. We didn't do codes. Our lives used to be one big overlapping Venn diagram. Shared calendars, shared contacts, the same dumb grocery list that always forgot paper towels. I set the phone back where I found it and told myself that people are allowed to change their minds about privacy. People are allowed to change. Names began to disappear. Little ones first. A neighbor's husband. Contractor we liked. Then Tessa, who's been in Lauren's life since college. I noticed when I tried to plan a surprise for her birthday and couldn't find Tessa's number anywhere. "Try Instagram," Lauren said, rinsing coffee grounds from the French press. She switched phones. Maybe, or maybe Tessa wasn't in the version of our life that required explaining. In her dresser, behind a stack of folded tank tops, I found a small cream envelope the way you find something you're not supposed to find, by accident, accompanied by a sudden pulse in your throat. Inside was a single business card. No name, no email, no phone number. Just that same raven, embossed black on black. Its head angled toward the corner like a compass that only points where it's invited. I tilted it under the lamp until the bird caught light and looked alive. I closed my hand around it and waited for a reason to feel stupid. None arrived. I put it back exactly where I found it and stood there for a long minute, listening to the washing machine churn through our shirts like it knew more than I did. Her smile changed, too. Not in a way a stranger would notice. She still laughed easily, still tilted her head when someone else spoke, still knew exactly when to reach for my hand. But there was rehearsal in it now, a faint echo like she'd already said the line somewhere else. The softness I used to feel when she touched me was replaced by something administrative. Pat on the arm. A thumbs up to a project completed. Even her goodnights turned efficient. Kiss, turn, phone. Online, she looked like a person in a commercial for a life that resembled ours. The photos were perfect, golden hour lighting, flattering angles, but cropped tight enough to turn rooms into abstractions and people into suggestions. A shoulder here, a sleeve there. Sometimes you could see a hand on the edge of the frame, fingers curled like they'd just been caught. The captions were breezy and interchangeable. Honored to support the arts. So grateful for this team. Nights like these. Hearts and stars and that champagne glass emoji that clinks without spilling. I scrolled and couldn't find a single sh*t that felt unplanned. Little artifacts started showing up with their own gravity. Receipts from places we never go, hotel bars with names that sound like perfumes, a florist across town, a rideshare drop-off 2 blocks from a boutique hotel with a lobby scented like cedar and citrus. A valet stub fell from her coat pocket one morning while she was rushing to answer a call. Timestamp: 11:42 p.m. Location: a property I knew only from influencers who call everything curated. We ducked in for a drink after a fundraiser, she said, zipping the coat with a casualness that sounded like practice. Parking was a nightmare. When you audit for a living, you learn to listen for omissions. Numbers can sing. They can also hum the tune that's missing. Lauren's stories developed rests. Tuesday nights vanished into you know how it is. And Wednesday mornings grew heavy with an inexplicable calm. The way air feels after a storm you slept through. She'd make late dinners like choreography. Pan, oil, sizzle, stir, as if the ritual itself were the meal. Sometimes she'd kiss my forehead before crawling into bed and whisper, "You're good," which is not the same as "we're good." Not even close. Our small, reliable rituals began to hollow out. On Fridays, the guy at the taco truck started asking, "Just you?" Before I opened my mouth. The mail accumulated glossy event programs addressed to Lauren alone. The dog walker texted me instead of her. "Everything okay? Miss seeing L." I typed "all good," with the same fake ease Lauren used when she said briefing, and I hated how it looked on my screen. Any single detail could be explained. That's the trap. Each thing wears a costume that says coincidence. Together, though, they start to assemble in your peripheral vision like a shape you don't want to name. One Tuesday, she came home damp around the hairline, like she'd showered somewhere that wasn't ours. She dropped her phone on the kitchen island and went to change. It sat there black and silent, heavier than it should have been. I tapped the screen, habit, reflex, I don't know. A message preview blinked into existence from an unknown number. No words, just a single raven emoji. The screen darkened before I could breathe. I felt silly, literal bird brain, but also not silly at all. She returned in sweats, smelling like the soap we don't own. I asked how the briefing went, and she told me about an intern who wore mismatched shoes and saved the day anyway. We laughed, because laughing is cheaper than asking a real question. I told her I was thinking about taking Thursday off to fix the back fence. "Love that," she said, and kissed my cheek on her way to brush her teeth. That night, I asked the universe for mercy. Let me be wrong. Let the pin be a coincidence, the card a novelty, the raven a mascot for something benign. Sleep doesn't negotiate. It just stacks what you already know. I woke with my jaw aching and the taste of metal in my mouth. I decided not to turn into the guy who checks phones or follows cars. I would be myself, measured, thorough, boring if necessary. I bought a small notebook from the office supply aisle and started keeping a quiet ledger. Date, time, detail, explanation. Monday, home 11:18 p.m. Hair damp. Rain. Wednesday, unknown number at 9:03 p.m. Call declined. Wrong number. Friday, photo posted 10:10 p.m. Two faces cropped out. Bad lighting. I wrote the sanest version of each truth in the margins, and the pages still looked like they were gathering into a flock. She began packing for offsites. Not overnights, she said, but she needed options. A black dress I'd never seen, heels that made our hallway a metronome, a travel-sized bottle of perfume that didn't live in our bathroom. She took calls on the balcony with her back to the glass, talking in a new dialect, closed loop, inner table, night session. Phrases that sound like business until you notice how softly people say them. "Who was that?" I'd ask. "The usual," she'd answer, and I'd realize in real time that I didn't know who the usual was anymore. At lunch, I sometimes walked past that boutique hotel and stood across the street like the building might confess. The valet stand gleamed, The doorman nodded at couples I didn't recognize. Once I thought I saw the man from the gala. Silver streak, perfect posture. Step through the revolving door with a different woman in a dress the color of ink. No raven on his lapel this time. The mind is a prankster. It will project patterns onto clouds, into crowds, on the face of someone you love. I kept writing, kept balancing the columns, kept pretending that math could save me from meaning. If you'd asked me then what I wanted, I would have said clarity. What I really wanted was permission. The permission to admit that something had snapped inside the frame, that the picture could still look perfect while the glass spiderwebbed under my thumbs. A week after the gala, the air in our house felt like it had shifted. Not in any obvious theatrical way, no slammed doors, no icy glares, but in those tiny atmospheric changes you only notice when you've lived with someone long enough to know the natural temperature of the room. It was cooler now, drafty in places. That Saturday, I was alone in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee and half reading an article on my tablet, when a notification chimed. We still had a shared account linked to our devices, a leftover convenience from when we coordinated calendars and grocery lists. This time it was a new voicemail alert. We didn't use voicemail much anymore. I tapped the notification, expecting a robocall or a wrong number. Instead, a man's voice filled the quiet, confident, familiar in the way you recognize a voice you've only overheard once or twice. "Same sweet as last time," he said, casual as if they were discussing lunch plans. "I'll have the wine waiting, and you looked incredible in that gown the other night. Couldn't take my eyes off you." My thumb hovered over the pause button, but I let it play out, my pulse thudding in my ears. When it ended, I stared at the timestamp, 23 hours ago. While I'd been under the impression she was at a late board strategy dinner, she had been somewhere else. I replayed the voice. No name, no context, just that calm certainty of someone who wasn't worried about being caught. I set the tablet down like it might burn me and walked to the window. Outside, the neighbors' kids were riding their bikes in lazy loops, their laughter tinny through the glass. I thought about calling Lauren right then, about letting the silence stretch until she filled it with whatever version of the truth she thought she could sell me. But something in me wanted more than an explanation. I wanted proof. Came faster than I expected. Later that afternoon, I was scrolling through the Arts Foundation's event page, half looking for that man with the raven pin in the background of some candid sh*t, when I froze. There, in the dim, moody light of a hotel lobby, was Lauren. Her black gown from the gala looked even more expensive in that lighting. She was pressed against the man from the foyer, his hand resting on her hip. They weren't posing. This wasn't for the benefit of a photographer. They were mid-laughter, foreheads almost touching, their free hands intertwined like they'd done it 100 times. I clicked the photo. It was tagged by a local society blogger, the kind who writes about Austin's most glamorous nights in the same breath as who wore it best. The caption was just a flourish of names and the hotel's Instagram handle. She hadn't mentioned going to the hotel after the gala. She'd said she was exhausted, that her feet were *ling her from the heels, that she couldn't wait to wash off the makeup and sleep. She'd said it like she was tucking the night into bed. I sat there for a long time, the photo glowing back at me. Every detail in it felt like a blade, her tilted smile, the way his thumb hooked just slightly into the fabric at her waist, the shadow of the raven pin on his lapel. The truth wasn't just creeping in anymore. It was kicking down the door. That evening, I didn't wait for her to come home. I pulled out the old carry-on from the closet, the one we'd used on our last trip to Santa Fe, and began filling it with the essentials. Clothes, charger, toiletries. I moved slowly, almost methodically, like speed might make it feel rash. On the kitchen counter, I left my set of house keys. No note, no demands, just absence. I didn't check my phone until I was halfway down the highway toward the coast. By then, the calls had started. First one, then another. A text. "Where are you?" Then another. "Please answer. We need to talk." I tossed the phone into the passenger seat. The road ahead unspooled in a ribbon of gray, and for the first time in days, my breathing felt steady. The motel I stopped at was nothing special, single story, salt-stained from the Gulf breeze, with a bedspread patterned in seashells that had seen better decades. But it had a door that locked from the inside and a view of the ocean if you craned your neck from the far corner of the window. I left the lights off, lay on the bed, and listened to the low roar of waves. By morning, the anger had burned down into something quieter. Not forgiveness, not even resignation, just the hollow space where you finally stop rehearsing arguments in your head. It was a few days later, in the kind of twist you couldn't script, that I learned the man with the raven pin wasn't just any stranger. A former colleague of mine called out of the blue. He'd heard I'd been at the gala and wanted to give me a heads up. "You know that club she's been going to?" he said, naming a private social club downtown I'd only heard about in passing. Word is, the board's in meltdown mode. One of their members, married guy, got photographed holding hands with someone who isn't his wife. Pictures been making the rounds among the event staff. I knew before he said it. It didn't take much imagination to realize how that lobby photo had traveled. Society events have long memories and faster gossip networks. The foundation people, the hotel staff, the club's inner circle, they'd all seen the same moment I had. Only for them, it wasn't just about my wife's betrayal. It was about a scandal in their own ranks. I'd like to say I wrestled with the ethics of what I'd done, but the truth is, when I sent that photo to one of the gala's organizers the night I left, I wasn't thinking about consequences beyond my own front door. I just wanted the truth to have somewhere else to live besides my head. Now it lived in theirs too. By the time Lauren called me again, her voice carried a new edge. Less pleading, more brittle. She didn't mention the photo, but she didn't have to. The fallout had big asterisk N, and there was no rewinding it. For the first time since the foyer, I felt like I wasn't the only one seeing things clearly. I didn't wait for a confrontation. I didn't draft a speech or stage some cinematic reveal with printed screen *TS and red circles. I moved through the house like a man walking a museum of his own life, every object labeled in my mind. The couch from the spring clearance sale. The coffee table we assembled on a Sunday, arguing over which screws went where. The framed print we couldn't agree on, but hung anyway. In the hallway closet sat our carry-on, our Santa Fe bag, our Denver bag, the bag we took to Marfa when we thought a change of scenery might change more than scenery. The zipper caught halfway, as if it wanted to delay me. I freed it and began to pack. I packed like I work, methodically. Shirts that matched everything. 2 pairs of jeans. My running shoes molded to my feet from morning jogs that used to end with coffee together. Charger, toothbrush, the ibuprofen bottle that rattled like castanets. My father's old pocket knife, the watch he gave me when I passed the CPA exam. The wedding band stayed put, not out of sentiment, but because I didn't want to hand it a dramatic gesture it didn't deserve. The house was too quiet, padded with that before rain stillness. I wrote no note. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound like a memo. See me after class. Instead, I placed my keys in the center of the kitchen island, lined up like an exhibit. By the front door, her clutches sat in a perfect row. Graphite, oxblood, champagne. On the nearest one lay the raven token, face up as though it had landed there deliberately. I didn't touch it. I didn't want to leave fingerprints on whatever story it was telling. I rolled my suitcase behind me, closed the door gently, and walked to the car without glancing at the windows. I pointed the car toward the coast. The city fell away in my mirrors. Muraled walls, runners on the bridge, the skyline still trying to look grown. At a red light, my phone lit up with her name. I let it ring out. Another call. Then a text. "Where are you?" Another, "Please, we can talk." I slid the phone into the glove box and let it go dark. I stopped for water and bad coffee at a gas station outside Bastrop, realizing I had no plan for where I'd sleep. That seemed right. Plans feel like control, but you're still just a passenger hoping the ride is smooth. The highway unrolled, and the sky staged one of those tangerine and violet Texas sunsets that make even cynics look up. The phone buzzed in the glove box like an insect trying to escape. I didn't open it. By the time I reached the coast, night had narrowed to sodium lamps and neon hum. A battered sign promised vacancy, ocean view. The motel clerk slid me a real key on a plastic tag for room 8 and told me if I stood on the chair, I might see water. Room 8 had the expected. A bedspread patterned with sea life, an overeager AC unit, a painting of a sailboat that had never touched wind. I sat on the bed, listening until the hum of the air conditioner and the ocean matched. I didn't cry. I didn't rehearse lines. I just lay back and let the sound sand down the edges. In the morning, I ran along the boardwalk. Not far, not fast. Just enough to feel like I belonged to myself again. Back at the room, the mirror showed someone who'd been awake for a year. My phone was a silent block on the nightstand, full of calls and messages I wouldn't open. One voicemail mentioned optics and damage control. Another was just breathing. Then, please, I powered it off. Silence wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. Days bled together. I ate at a diner where the cook overbuttered the toast on purpose. I read the same page of a paperback 3 times. In the evenings, I sat on the sand, the styrofoam cup warm in my hands, letting the horizon decide what mattered. Anger dissolved first. Confusion lingered, but even that began to feel portable. On what I think was the 4th day, I emailed a lawyer. Short, polite, no attachments. Just a request for a meeting. That last night, I walked the pier until the boards thinned and you could feel the water holding you up. Someone had carved a heart into the railing, then scratched it out. I stood there and said her name until it sounded like an address I used to live at. Then I turned back toward the motel, wind at my back, and thought, for the first time in weeks, that maybe quiet could belong to me again. The first thing I noticed when I turned my phone back on was how quickly the messages stopped feeling like they were for me. At first, they'd been personal, pleading, apologizing, bargaining. But somewhere around day 3, they shifted in tone. Less about us, more about her. Words like misunderstanding and taken out of context and making people talk. It was the kind of language you use when the audience you're really worried about is outside the house. I didn't reply. On the 5th morning, over coffee so burnt it tasted like the filter had been charred, I saw the story break. Not in any major outlet, but in the glossy society blog that thrives on rumor disguised as philanthropy coverage. A grainy sh*T from the gala foyer had made it online. Not the photo I'd seen in the hotel lobby, that one was still sitting in my camera roll, but a different angle, her head tipped toward him, his hand at her back, the raven pin sharp even in low resolution. The caption was pure innuendo, but the comments didn't need it spelled out. People who lived for invitations like those started connecting dots. It was the same day a friend from my audit days called. He didn't bother with pleasantries. You didn't hear it from me, he said. But that board member, your wife's +1, he's got a mess on his hands. The club's in damage control mode. Something about an inappropriate display at a public event. I asked what that meant. He hesitated. Then, let's just say the photo from the gala wasn't the only one. Somebody sent one to the event organizers the night it happened. Went straight to the chairwoman. I could hear the unasked question in his voice. Was it you? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. That evening, I forwarded the lobby sh*T, the one with their hands intertwined, to a single address. No words in the email, just the image. The recipient list was public on the gala's press release. Media Liaison, Foundation. I knew enough about how these circles worked to guess what would happen next. The response was faster than I expected. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed with a news alert from a different society page. Unconfirmed reports of board scandal spark internal review. The article was pure filler, but the accompanying photo wasn't. There they were, side by side in the hotel lobby, her gown and his pin unmistakable, the timestamp just hours after the gala ended. By the next morning, she called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. You're making this worse, she said, skipping hello entirely. Her voice was taut, like she'd been holding her breath for days. I'm not making anything, I said. Just letting people see what's already there. Do you have any idea what this could do to my work? To everything I've built? Do you have any idea what you've already done to mine? I asked. She went quiet. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted. Less defensive, more desperate. We can get ahead of this. If we show a united front, people will believe it was nothing. I laughed short and sharp. A united front? That's rich. After we hung up, I realized I didn't feel the surge of guilt I'd half expected. If anything, there was a clarity to it. For months, maybe longer, she'd been curating her image while cutting me out of the frame. Now the frame was cracking, and I wasn't the one holding the glue. By the weekend, the ripple had reached her professional world. I didn't need to dig for the details. Mutual contacts were more than happy to supply them. The board member's wife had been notified. The foundation's chair had expressed disappointment. The club where they'd both been fixtures was evaluating membership guidelines. I pictured the conversations she was having, measured, careful, strategic. The kind where you say, of course, and understand completely, while calculating how much truth you can admit without losing everything. It would have been easy to stop there, to let the fallout play itself out. But the part of me that makes a living following paper trails couldn't resist. I packaged the 2 photos, the foyer embrace and the hotel lobby *T, into a single PDF and sent it to one more address. The private inbox of a journalist I trusted, someone who'd once covered a high-profile audit I'd worked on. The subject line was 3 words. For your records. I didn't expect them to run it. Society gossip wasn't their beat. But I knew they kept files. And files have a way of resurfacing when the timing is right. 2 days later, she stopped calling. No texts, no emails. Just a blank space where her side of the noise had been. I'd like to say I missed it, but the truth is, silence fit better. When the update came from my audit friend, he's been asked to step down from the board, I didn't smile. Not exactly, but there was a symmetry to it.